Good morning, everybody. My name is Kerry Jenkins, and I'm the chair of the Education and Children's Social Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I want to welcome you all to the meeting this morning. I've got to say it's really nice to be back in this room and to be surrounded by such inspirational artwork. So if you get a chance to have a look at it before you leave, please do so. We are being recorded and live webcast. The subsequent broadcast will be put on the Council's YouTube channel, and members of the public, if any members of the public arrive, are allowed to take photographs, except where there are confidential items. We have got apologies this morning from Councillor Gilly Birmingham and Justine Lomas. We have got a number of parent governors and councillors not in the room. They may join us, they may be running late. Need to ask members here if there are any declarations of interest.
Chair, just usual, in the interest of transparency, I was employed by CENDIAS until April this year.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes.
So I chair All Saints Multi-Academy Trust Board and Birmingham Darcy Multi-Academy Trust Board too.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. Before we go on to the action notes, can I just ask if there are any items of urgent business to go on the agenda? Thank you very much. So we just need to agree the action notes of the formal meeting held on the 20th of July. Hopefully everybody's had a look through the minutes. Everybody happy to agree those? Yes, that's lovely. There are a few updates that we're still waiting for. They will be progressed by Amanda. So if we move on to item 5, which is the send item, I'd like to welcome Sue Harrison, who's our Director of Children and Families. She's accompanied by Bob Harrison, who is the project manager, and we've also got Joanne Condon, and she's online. So welcome. I'll pass over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Chair. Victor Rowan, who usually supports me with these updates, is on leave, having just recently got married. So that's why he's not here today. And Bob is deputising for Victor, and Joe as the interim head of Senar. They've really got a handle on the detail, so it's handy that they're here, then they can field more detailed questions. But you'll see the highlight report. Obviously, it's relatively recent since we did a highlight report from July. So we've taken, as you would expect, the highlight report that we are presenting at the Send Improvement Board this afternoon for colleagues to scrutinise. You'll see from the presentation that we are starting off, as we always do, with reminding us what our vision is for Birmingham children, that Birmingham children can thrive. I don't know who's in charge of the slides, but if you could just move it, that's great. Thank you very much. And this isn't a case of us fixing Send in isolation, is it? You know, the Send improvement plan aligns with our directorate improvement plan, because Send is everybody's business, and to support children and their families who have Send, we have to have an improvement journey that makes sure that we are confident that our children are safe, achieving, that they're included, that they are confident, and that they are healthy. So the principle of early help, getting it right the first time, making sure that we start with where families are, not where we want them to be, and making sure that we focus on what children and young people can do rather than what they can't do, is really important in our practice. And that is a culture shift in our practice that we are leading at every level in the organisation. And of course, in particular with Send, it's a partnership organisation responsibility. Of course, the council can do some things, and we're supporting our improvement journey. Jo's here and she can tell you what we're doing to improve the Senar team. But we could have the best Senar team in the world, and if they're in isolation or not working well with health colleagues and social care colleagues, then young people won't get the support that they need. So this is absolutely a partnership priority. We'll be launching our children's plan towards the end of this year, and supporting children and young people with Send in Birmingham is a key priority in our children's plan as well. But moving on, there's been some updates around national consultation on Send and inclusion. You'll be aware of the green paper that is absolutely aligned to our commitment to early help. When we say Education Secretary Nadine Zahawi, that is obviously very out of date. Very out of date now. But hey ho, I still think that that an Education Secretary is going to support inclusive education. And we are working with the DfE on, there are some real tensions between the focus on academic success and the focus on inclusion. Because some schools are reticent to take young people with special educational needs, worried that it'll affect their academic achievements, and that Ofsted will come along, and all those debates around how do we measure inclusion and how do we incentivise schools to be inclusive, because they all want to be inclusive, but it does have an impact on your academic attainment. And actually, if we focus on progress, then that's not an issue. But if we focus on end results, then it can be an issue for schools, and it can be a real issue for schools. So we continue to have that debate with the DfE, and we have this at our SEND Improvement Board as well at times, around perverse incentives for schools, not to be inclusive, and how damaging that can be. And the proposed policies are looking to consolidate a single national SEND and alternative provision system that sets clear standards for provision. And we really welcome that. When it'll arrive, who knows? But we welcome that and would want to support the DfE in putting that together. Because what we're having conversations with the DfE, myself and the Chief Executive, is that we've got a lot of learning to do in Birmingham, but what a great test bed Birmingham could be nationally for the new policies, the new procedures. We can test it out. And to be honest with you, if things work in Birmingham, they can be made to work anywhere, because we've got such a variety of contexts and such a broad set of children and broad set of needs, actually. So out of the failure that we've experienced, we can bring some real good learning, and we want to be excellent. We don't just want to be fixed, we want to be excellent. So that's again the conversations we're having around that national agenda. Okay, thank you. You'll be aware of the Commissioner's report, but one thing that John Coughlin is in agreement with us is that we need a system which is more inclusive. It's great that he's seen some excellent inclusive schools and school leaders, so we've got some real good practice to lean on and to learn from. But it's also true to say that it's not consistent across the city. And we've got some schools that exclude children, some schools that don't exclude children. So we're having those discussions with school leaders, and Bob can tell us a bit more later on about our inclusion strategy and the work that's going on with school leaders to agree what good inclusion looks like. How do we create an inclusive system where schools don't feel they have to exclude because they've no other alternative? So that's that one. Thank you. I'm going to pass on to Bob now, who's going to talk about the evolution of our local strategies. And these strategies are important because they bring together the thinking around what good looks like and how we're going to deliver it. So I think sometimes parents get a bit frustrated when you talk about we're developing this strategy and that strategy, because they say to me, well, so what, Sue? What difference will that make on the ground? And of course, tomorrow it won't make a difference, but this time next year it will. Because having an agreed strategy means we can then all be accountable for delivering that strategy. So that's why it's important that objective one around strategic system leadership is making sure that we've got the right strategies in place and that we're co-producing them with our parents and carers and with our young people, as well as with our partners. So over to you, Bob. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, so as Sue says, the co-production piece is quite crucial. That we're not doing this in isolation from our partners, that all of the stakeholders across the local area and in the city have a chance to influence what is happening with these strategies. And the goal being everything is rooted in reality. So not just having a theoretical approach and a hypothetical approach. We're talking about improving and increasing the numbers of young people and children who've got education, health and care plans in mainstream environments. Actually, what do we need to do to make that a reality? Actually, I meant to say earlier, Chair, apologies, that there's a point of accuracy in the notes. It says there's a 50% is the national average for EHCPs at the moment. It's about 40% at the moment. I think it got conflated with the green paper conversation, but I'll send you an email about that a bit later. So the goal in Birmingham is to move us from being out of kilter with what are national indicators. But it's not a target to chase. It's not something that we're saying we must have 40% of our children in mainstream environments who've got education, health and care plans. It's saying what is the right provision for those children? What is the right support that they need? What is the right time to have that support? And then we'll track the progress of those children and young people more effectively. And to be able to do that, we know we've got to improve the capacity across the local area. And that's in 3 different areas, both capacity of places and spaces, but the capacity of particular environments and settings to be able to support people most effectively. And then the capacity of the professionals to understand the whole system. So not to be working in silos and having a much more joined up way forward to support our children and families to ensure that the provision is available and they're better equipped to be able to deliver that provision. And so the learning and development piece is talking about how we train across the whole area and not just, again, train specific people for specific things, but a much wider learning and development piece for the stakeholders and the team so we all understand what we're doing. And the final piece for the strategies on the systems leadership is around the workforce development. How do we attract the best people and how do we retain the best people to work in the city for our children and making sure that we're maintaining a level of quality that we need for the future. There are some challenges around attracting a variety of different skill sets at the moment, but the workforce development strategy is going to address that. We're hoping to have much better projects, much more interesting things to work on, but also looking at how do we recruit, what are the things that are unique about Birmingham and how do we keep people in the city. So yeah, quite exciting times in that respect. Objective 4 with the project is called the Pathways Objective, and that is very much developing its own inclusion strategy, and that is ensuring, again, that settings, that professionals are equipped to support children prior to them reaching a crisis point. So it's not about them getting to a point and needing to be excluded. It's not about them having no intervention at a low level, at a sort of a universal level, to help them rather than almost take a punitive approach. And as Sue said, and as John Coughlin has recognised, there is some really, really good practice in the city. It's just not necessarily consistent enough. So we're trying to make sure that is consistently played out and that we're learning from our partners and we're learning from those who are good at this inside the city, but also outside of the city and bringing good practice into the city. So I think that's the piece on strategies. If we could go to the next slide, that'd be good, please. So things we learned, we ran about a dozen co-production workshops with all stakeholders. So that would be families, parents, it would be lots of different professionals, school leaders, community voluntary sector, as well as education leaders from FE, early years, etc. So the full suite of partners were involved in the co-production workshops. And what we found, these were the sort of the real headline findings from those activities. Pooling resources, collaborative deployment. So the concept of actually not, really working collaboratively and not working in silos, thinking about getting a district working and a team around the school is a concept that we're exploring. None of this is set in stone, but it's things we're quite keen to explore a bit further. A lot more data. There's lots of data in the city, but it tends to be in pockets and it tends to be a little bit unique to each service. And what we're looking at is how do we bring that much more closely together to help us analyse trends, to see where need is greatest and to see where we can then step in if there are specific things that we need to address, whether that be in a locality, or whether that be within a service, or whether that be with a particular family. And everything about what we're trying to do is back to this concept of a graduated response. The graduated response or graduated approach It's about being proactive and offering people a really good set of universal services so that there's something for everybody at any point of need or any point of them flagging an issue. They have a universal offer. Then there's a targeted offer, which is slightly more of a direct intervention with professionals or with people trained to support them in a more targeted and individual way. And then a specialist service, which will always be required. And all three of those things come together. So universal in the first place, a targeted offer if we need to add a little bit more, and specialist services. But the specialists are really for the most needy. It shouldn't be that specialist is working with absolutely everybody. The specialist is for the most needy, so that we can really use those resources carefully. And the thing I sort of missed there was the statutory functions. So within any whole system, there needs to be a core of offer. That universal offer needs to be a core offer that everybody can access. And how do we support that? How do we put that into play so the resources are available? And there's lots of conversations happening with health colleagues, with education and with social care colleagues to work out how do we get those statutory functions to offer that universal piece in the most effective way so that we can all support families and children as best we can. The knock-on being and the capacity and the sufficiency, as we've talked about. And one of the really key things about the capacity and sufficiency is not always looking outside or not looking to bring in or looking to pay for, but actually what's the peer-to-peer support? There's projects already underway called the Developing Local Provision Project. That is schools to school support. We're getting a report at the end of September around that, and that's producing some really, really good stuff. It's already showing how schools can help each other, and that idea of sharing learning, sharing good practice across the piece. And that is something we'll tap into a lot more and see how we can expand that so the whole city gets it. It's consistent regardless of where you live. And then communication. So there is an evolution of what's called the local offer being what is available, but there's also a local offer website, which is where people can access the information about what is an offer in the city. And we're trying to improve that so the communications are more effective, so all stakeholders have all of the information they need at the right time. Okay, next slide, please. So yes, we've got some key data here just to give some headlines of what the local area is working with at the moment. Joe will know this a bit better than I. The CENAR team currently maintain just over 11,400 education, health and care plans. That fluctuates year on year. Some plans get ceased whilst new plans are being written. But the general trend across the country is that the education, health and care plan numbers will increase as we move forward. You can see that even since last August, that's gone up by nearly 500, sorry. So there's a general trend that the number of EHCPs are increasing. Also, the number of requests for assessment is increasing at the moment. So in the last 12 months, there are over 2,000 requests for an assessment to receive an EHCP. And in the last 12 months, another 1,231 were actually issued. So just because there's a request for an assessment doesn't mean it automatically goes into being an education health and care plan. Sometimes there are other interventions that we can make, and we can parachute in some support or offer some capacity to schools, to families, so that the HCP is not required. These next two are around some performance measures. It's a national standard that an education, health and care plan needs to be issued within 20 weeks of a request for an assessment. The national average is about 65% at the moment. Birmingham was below that relatively recently, less than a year ago. But now we're up to that national average, and we're striving all of the time to go beyond that and push that harder. Joe and the team are working phenomenally hard to ensure that everybody gets those outcomes, that education health and care plan, or the decision whether to issue it within the 20 weeks. So it's a key national indicator and something that we're very aware of. One huge challenge which Birmingham has addressed is the situation about annual reviews. So every year, every child with an education, health and care plan should have an annual review. That should be completed on an annual basis. Sometimes it results in no change whatsoever to the plan, but those things should be happening on an annual basis. Birmingham were not alone that there was a big backlog that had happened nationally as a result of some policy changes from the past that created some capacity issues. But the great news is that having had a really big backlog of 4,500, that number is really low now. It's down to 720, and I don't know. I'll ask Joe when we think that may be clear, but it's due to be done, and the work that's been happening by the team has really had huge impact on reducing that backlog, which is very, very good news. I think the final thing on this slide is around the phase transfers. It's really quite a worrying time for families where they're moving from one establishment to another, or from one year group to another, where there's that phase transfer from early years into primary, or primary into secondary into 16+ provision. And to be honest, it was either not recorded, or the recorded numbers were pretty poor for Birmingham this time last year. It was 1%, but actually last year they did 98% of those phase transfers, which is a February date. So it was a tremendous effort by the team, and extremely well done in that respect. And that happens in February each year, that people are issued their decision.
I'd just like to chip in there and say what this data doesn't capture is all the school level support that goes on, which we want to be able to capture that, to be able to report it better. Because most young people, if you don't, if you're assessed and you don't require an education, health and care plan, you still might well require support, which then our team will put in resources in terms of people and in terms of money to schools to support those young people. And I'm really promoting that approach, because if a young person doesn't need a health and care plan, but they can get the support without having the plan, then why wouldn't we do it that way? So we are still working on a way of recording that and reporting that back up to yourselves, because just the EHCP data alone doesn't reflect the support that young people are having. So that is work in progress. I think we need to speed up a bit, because I'm conscious we want time for questions. So if I take the system leadership update, that's really promoting the local offer. I think the game changer there is that we're recruiting an apprentice whose full-time job will be to maintain the local offer. And that's really important, because any website is only as good as the input. And we've got partners sending lots of information through, but we didn't have anybody whose permanent job it was to keep it updated. So unsurprisingly, it was out of date. It's still not quite there yet, but we still want to do some rebranding, don't we, Bob? Rebranding as a partnership. And Rachel Edwards, our comms officer, is working really hard on that. But it's good news that we'll have a full-time person to update. And I would recommend everybody on this committee goes on the local offer, give us your feedback, because it needs to be a comprehensive offer for everyone. Getting the basics right, just a brief update there. We've got, it sounds quite, it doesn't sound very exciting that standing operating procedures have been written, but it's absolutely crucial that we're all consistent with our operating procedures. If you want, Joe can give you more information about those. A quality assurance framework, we didn't have one. There's no consistent way in which we're monitoring the quality of our plans. We've got that now. The next job is to implement it, obviously, but we're putting those basic things in place, which is really important. We're continuing to promote Birmingham as the place to come if you want to support children and young people with STEM. We've now got manageable caseloads. We've now got small teams that are well managed, and there's a real improvement journey. And again, I think it's fair to say we're seeing much more interest in Birmingham than we were this time last year. When it is true to say, and Joe can back me up, that when you told an agency person where the job was, and you mentioned Birmingham, they wouldn't come, would they, Joe? They don't say that now, actually. So that is again, I'm not saying we got it all sorted, but it's a good sign that we're attracting good people and they're wanting to come to Birmingham. And we've also reviewed and adjusted our therapy offer. So at the start of autumn term, we'll have a better, more comprehensive offer for those young people. In terms of objective 3, working together well, we've really had a big focus on co-production, and rightly so. We've never finished co-production, but we need to embed it across all the other objectives now. So we've got a participation and co-production officer functions and JD. We're ready to recruit to that permanent role, because again, it's making sure that we're not relying on temporary staff, and we've got permanent people doing those things. Some great youth engagement events took place in July. We're surveying young people all the time, and we received over 100 responses to the survey. So it's going to close this month, and we'll let you know what those young people have said. In terms of objective 4 and pathways, we've got a really good working group that are building relationships. They're reviewing current systems for out of school. We're very worried about the numbers of children out of school, and it's a big focus for us. Bob's already mentioned developing local provision, that school-to-school support. We've got a review that will be published later this month to share the learning, some really good stuff there. And we've got some special schools have always delivered outreach, and I wouldn't want you to think that they didn't, but it wasn't coordinated across the city. Now it is, and that's outreach support will be delivered in a more consistent way across the autumn term. In terms of golden threads, we've talked about the graduated response and how important that is, and delivering that child-centred approach. So I'm not going to read through all that slide, because I think we've talked about empowering schools and empowering district working and putting children and communities at the heart. So we're moving towards that culture. Are we there yet? No, we're not. And Birmingham, with its size, is always going to struggle with consistency of practice. Actually, it's always going to be a big challenge. And that's why it's so important we've got our quality assurance framework, so that we can have that organised approach and know where we are with the quality of our work. I had a meeting just last night with the LGA offering support to Birmingham, and one thing they are offering is some peer review of the quality of our education, health and care plans, and at the right time I think that will be really useful. We'll definitely make the most of the LGA offer. Of course, it will have to align with our improvement plan, because you can't have too many cooks, interfering. So as long as it's all aligned, and it will be very welcome receive that support. So we can feed back at a later meeting when we've agreed that programme with the LGA. Finally, the update on our APP around SENDIAS. As you know, we were committed to a SENDIAS review, an external review. That review took place. The recommendations from the review are accepted in principle by the improvement board, by the head of service and by the commissioner. So we're moving forward in a very sensitive way with our families to make sure that we're devising a plan where we can be compliant with statutory minimum standards, because obviously we want that to be the case. Really important that we co-produce that way forward, though, with our stakeholders, and that no families are disadvantaged by any changes. So those families currently being supported by the SENDIAS social workers will continue to be supported by those social workers, although those social workers are in the process of moving over to Birmingham Children's Trust, because it makes sense to have a holistic support for families as part of the Trust's early help offer. So a bit of a whistle-stop Chair, but I'm not sure what's some time for questions.
Thanks very much, Sue and Bob and Johanna. I've got questions. Okay, so I'll take Sarah first, and then Councillor Jan, Councillor Morrell and Councillor Hughes.
Just a couple of practical questions, really. What's the time frame for the strategies and policies being in place? Obviously, it's not now. So what are the interim arrangements broadly for schools while they're waiting for those? So we've got a number of schools with children, as you will know, I'm sure, that are waiting for places elsewhere, are left in limbo at the moment. I'm sure the answer isn't we wait till the strategies and processes are in place before anyone can be held to account for that. So that's my first question. What's the interim things? What are schools seeing as a change now? So if I went and asked my head teachers what's different now, what should the response be? And I presume the backlog of completing paperwork is due to staffing pressures. And how's that going to be addressed in future staffing models so that we don't end up with a continual problem with it?
Very good question there. I'll hand over to Jo to give the detailed responses. The ABP is clear about the strategy. Meanwhile, Jo and her team are working hard with individual schools and individual children. Do you want to talk about the home bridging team, Jo, and say how we're putting temporary support in? And then if you pick up the question about what our head teacher's telling you is different now, that would also, I think, be helpful.
Yeah, certainly. I think in terms of what's different now, we respond. And I think that's been a huge frustration for schools and parents and families in this historical problematic SENAR understaffed service. And the feedback I'm getting now is that schools are getting responded to. Staff might not have all the solutions because of the broader issues that are surrounding the SENAR service. But I think that's the key, is that we've got people in post who are responding, who are being able to support schools, who are being able to offer advice, and who are being able to really take action on all this outstanding work that's caused problems across the system. Funding has been an historic issue, and that is relating to lack of capacity in the service, because a lot of when we first expanded the service back last year, I think the first 3-4 months was spent clearing up funding queries where schools were not receiving the correct funding, forms hadn't been signed off, plans hadn't been reviewed, and therefore the funding hadn't been put in place. So I think the two key early responses and early successes have been that response and the ability to be able to address the issues that we're actually able to at the moment with the lower level things like putting the funding into place. I mean, I think your other question, sorry, it's quite difficult to hear online, was around the children awaiting special schools. So there's a lot of work going on around us where children are in schools, they don't access our home bridging team, but where children are out of school and don't have a school place, we have a home bridging team that provides safe and well-being checks, but also arranges interim tuition, supports the family through advice, attends annual reviews, makes sure that those children are prioritised within the service, and advocates for those families really, and make sure that they're overseen and that they're not forgotten about and they do get the education provision that they're entitled to, albeit off a school site. In terms of the children who are in school awaiting a special school place, we are developing a sense efficiency strategy which will have long-term impact, and we're hoping we'll have shorter-term impact so there's different ways that we're going to try and go about increasing the number of special school places. So some of those will come into fruition sooner than others. And I don't actually lead on that piece of work, but I feed into it, so we share the numbers. Within the SENAR service itself, we've made a lot of changes in terms of understanding where the special school places availability is. And now we've got a dedicated team which just deals with those children who are awaiting a special school place. So they're all in a single place, and actually that team manages the children across year groups, so rather than being allocated by postcodes as the other teams are. So the minute that we know that there's a special school place that's come up for a year 1 child, for example, that team get on it and get the consults out, so we know that as soon as a place is available, then it's taken by those children on the list.
Does that answer your questions?
It tells us where we're at the moment. I don't think I mean, you all know that that's not great, is it? But it's basically those children that are in the wrong setting at the moment needs are not being adequately met, I would suggest. And I appreciate where we're at and what you're trying to do to address that. But when we're talking about being inclusive in schools, where's the support for the schools with children who need additional funding for it in schools to maintain that? it's not.
We continue to work.
I understand that.
But nobody's going to defend where we are and say it's acceptable. It's better than it was and it needs to be better still. But
so what, sorry, just my initial question was around the timeframes when those strategies and policies will be in place so that there can be some sort of accountability for that.
those were the ABP.
Just remind me of the date.
So there are sort of 3 drop dead dates, if you like. The final drafts for the strategies are going to go to the SEND Improvement Board in November this year for consideration and sign off throughout December. Then I think it needs to go through the cabinet system. So we need to look at the authorisation. So you're looking at the strategies being completed and finalised and really, if you like, operational from probably March, April next year for implementation thereafter. So it's good in a way that it fits in with the financial timetable as well, so that we can look at the resourcing and where things can go. But the sort of 3 dates, if you like, are going to be November for the final drafts, early in the new year for the formal sign-off, and then from Easter onwards is the implementation of the processes.
And of course, it's not just the council that signs off the strategy, because the organisations who are contributing, they all have their own governance, health, etc. So we want, obviously it's very important that the council takes responsibility for it, and so does the ICS health system.
ICS and the
so it's going to go through all that governance to be signed off, and then there's that proper accountability.
Can I just respond to Joe about the 2 points you made, Joe, about being there, responding, and the money? I was a former head teacher, and actually they might sound minor, but those 2 things are quite key. So when I was a head teacher, you rang up and you got no response, and that was very, very frustrating for families and for schools. So actually they might seem minor when you're in a school. The fact that somebody responds to you from the council is quite a step forward, even if they can't give you a suitable answer. Can I just ask as well about the staffing pressures and the plan to make sure that there's a suitable staffing structure to address the paperwork demands going forward?
Yeah, so I can pick that one up. At the moment, we're over capacity. So when we model the capacity needed across the service, we've taken in additional capacity on an interim basis because of the backlog, and quite frankly, because of the state of our EHCPs and the amount of work needed to do them. So going forward, we're looking at a permanent structure, and that permanent structure has been properly modelled based on time taken to do work, number of staff, capacities. So it is significantly bigger than the previous permanent staff structure. And myself, day-to-day working in the service, I'm very confident that the model that has been proposed going forward has got the correct amount of capacity in it for what we need to stop this happening again.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Councillor Hughes, I'm not going to call you yet on that, but you can ask your question because you're on the list. Councillor Jan.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, with young people, as we know, we've got high-risk young people. Now, some high-risk young people no school wants. What happens to these young people that can't be found a placement, and how would their education be supported, including the families?
Again, I'll hand over to Joe, because as well as the housing scheme, we work closely with Empower You, and we work closely with the Birmingham Children's Trust, as do our alternative provision. So youngsters that aren't in mainstream school, we're worried about at risk of exploitation. We've got the overview of the Empower You team. Obviously, again, it's not ideal that those children aren't in full-time education, but we are aware of that, and they will be allocated a professional from the Children's Trust, as well as our Home Bridget team. Have you got anything to add, Joe?
Only to say that we've got different types of provision across the city. So these children may have been excluded from a mainstream school. So they would then either go to our City of Birmingham school, which is our PRU, or pupil referral unit, who've got the expertise in being able to deal with these children who are struggling and presenting with challenging behaviours, or we have a few maintained, or we call an SEMH school. So these are schools such as Lindsworth, who really do have the expertise to be able to support, manage and actually help develop these children and young people as well. So they tend to be, if they fall out of school, and they will go to the home bridging team, and then the home bridging team work with Birmingham Children's Trust and other partners to put a team around these children. And then it may be that these children are not ready to go back into school, and they'll offer interim support through home tutoring, or they may be that they'll work to refer them into the City of Birmingham school, or we'll start consulting with specialist provision to be able to find them a school placement. So they sit in that area so that they're managed and supported in that way.
Thank you. Just another quick one. What if a young person like Linsworth or Values Academy decided not to take a young person on specifically because of their high needs and the risk, and they have to think about the other young people that they're educating, and say, for example, no school wants to basically support an individual that's at very high risk that could potentially cause harm to others, including staff? How would they be educated? Will they be forgotten about? Because I understand there's a lot of challenging young people. There's a lot going on. But how are these individuals monitored? And if they are being monitored, how would we integrate them into schooling, especially if they haven't been in school for like 3-4 years?
Reintegrate them, basically. I mean, the easy answer to your question is that we have the powers to direct schools to take youngsters. Now, that's not ideal if we have to direct, because it suggests that schools aren't confident they can cope with those young people. So the question we're asking, and I'm asking the team to ask head teachers, is, well, what will it take? Because it's all about managing risk, isn't it? And nobody, including me, wants a young person to harm themselves or other children or members of staff. However, we can't forget about these children. So that question, what will it take? And that's part of our sufficiency, where we're looking at more resource provision for schools to engage young people. It's also because it does tend to be older teenagers, as you know, they go more off the rails. And I would suggest that's because we don't have the choice of pathways for them, because they're turned off by an academic curriculum, and schools struggle because currently a vocational pathway is more expensive if it's available at all. So part of the breaking down barriers work that we're doing is putting those pathways in place. They're not in place to the extent we'd like now. So those young people are very much under the line of Empower You and Trust. I think the trick is in the future to have more options to engage those youngsters so they feel valued, so they can participate, and they're not just experiencing what they think is failure, because then they don't want to join in. And there's always a window of opportunity to engage those young people, and that's why we've got to have a team around them, whether it's the home bridging tutors that they get on with, whether it's a youth worker, or whether it's their social worker, who at that moment, when they're willing to engage, can provide. And we do actually have some really good engagement at that very high, serious level. The issue for me is that some children kind of almost have to escalate up to that level before they get that support. And that's no criticism, because that's the statutory services, but we need to put more early intervention in for diversionary activities. But to reassure you, those children are not lost to us, that they're in our line of sight. Sometimes they don't want to be in our line of sight, and the Trust does excellent work with the police and with Empower You, as you know, and the Youth Justice to try to keep them engaged and safe, because there are so many pressures, but they're not forgotten about.
Thanks, Sue. It'd be really interesting to hear a bit more about that pathways development, you know, as you go down that journey. I think. Councillor Jan, was that all your questions?
Sorry, there was just a little tiny wing on. Okay, if any hard to reach young person from a primary school, now, and yes, I'm not going to go into it, but there is young people that get permanently excluded from primary schools. Do they get the same support as what they would get in a senior surroundings, or would that be slightly different because they're a lot younger than the secondary age kids?
We have different provision for primary age children, but the system, as in we'll wrap around you, is the same. It is very worrying when you've got permanently excluded children from primary school.
Yeah.
So we're working with our school leaders on a restorative practice model. Some schools already do that, and we've engaged Mark Finnis to help us with that programme. And he, you know, working with restorative practice some schools across the country have gone from really high excluding figures to zero exclusion because they're working with children in a different way. The rights respecting UNICEF work also, those schools that are rights respecting schools very, very seldom exclude. And as you know, 2023, the year of change for children, we're wanting all our schools to go for UNICEF rights respecting accreditation, and we're going to go for a UNICEF city. So it's all about working with, isn't it, and supporting schools to enable them to have other options than exclude any age of child, but in particular primary. But we've got a system that wraps around those youngsters to give them appropriate provision.
Thanks, Sue. Thank you. That's the round.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, in particular the data, which is very interesting because you remember at last committee I talked a lot about data, so I was really reassured to see that. And thank you again, Sue. The breaking down barriers, when you just said about academia is not the pathway for everybody, you're probably surely shaking my head. I was like, yes, absolutely. Which brings me on to my question. I've got two main questions, but the first one is about the inclusion strategy, because I think it's very important that we talk about that around the breaking down barriers. I was at the Conservative Party hustlings, the leadership hustlings at the NEC. I had my hand up to ask a question to both the leaders about this particular issue. And I was really happy I never got asked the question, because the person who did get asked was Councillor Ruth Buttery, who is my counterpart on Dudley Council. And she asked the question about what we're doing about working class boys, in particular from white working class and the Black Caribbean community. And I just found it really interesting how when she got up in Dudley and asked this question, they're clearly doing a lot of work in Dudley. She got listened to and she got a really thoughtful answer. And I had a conversation with her afterwards about this. And I says, why is it that you're on the ball but Birmingham are not, given the fact that I am that demographic and I've been talking about this for so long, and often I feel at least that I just completely get ignored. So I want to know about the time frame of the inclusion strategy, and I want reassurances today that you are going to be looking around that issue. I understand we're also now the Senate Director from the Council, so potentially working together to actually do something about this, because it's a very important body of work that needs to be addressed. So I've got some reassurances on that around the time frame and what we're doing. Second thing I wanted to highlight is SENDIAS. You probably know I was going to bring it up because you put it in here. It's about the external review and what happened on the SEND Improvement Board. You said it was accepted in principle. Let me read this out. All recommendations from the review are accepted in principle with the full support of the Commissioner pending a full report to this board. I'd like an update on what's actually happening with this. Because when I was on the board, the head of SENDIAS was there, and she brought a full document rebutting a lot of the claims from this report, and she passed it around the table to everybody. And when she left the meeting, that document was removed from the board members. So it wasn't really accepted in principle, because the head of SEND wasn't actually given proper opportunity to rebuttal what was in it. And the red flag for me on this is a previous green paper review that we went to where SENDIAS attended. The consensus around the room was that the green paper was trying to take power away from parents, taking local authorities to tribunal so that it gives more power to the local authorities, so you effectively end up marking your own homework. So if that is what's happening, or that's the fear what we think might be happening, how can we have any faith that in future, if we see improvements with SEND, that it actually has been improved, or you've just taken, you've reformed or restructured one of the main bodies of the local authority, which is SENDIAS, which gives parents the ability to take a local authority to tribunal if they fail them with SEND. And obviously, these are really serious concerns. I'm not making any allegations. I'm just saying that it's a red flag. I've raised it previously, and I'd like an explanation really, or some reassurances. And I would also like to request again that the head of SENDIAS is invited to this committee at some point in the future, so we can actually have an open, public and transparent debate about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Moran. Sue?
Thank you. I'll take the question for SENDIAS first, and then the white working class boys. So the head of service has now accepted the recommendations. John Coughlan's coming to this committee, isn't he, next month, I believe? So, he will be available to answer those questions as well. And I really understand those concerns that you've shared around parents being empowered and continue to be empowered and supported. This is why we're not going to rush into any changes with SENDIAS. We're on a journey where we're working with a strengths-based journey. Obviously, we all want to be compliant. And the aim is that by next September, the service will be compliant. And I can reassure you now that I'll be working with parents and with the service to make sure that we've got that compliance. And parents will continue to be supported. And I think and believe that as we move forward in the way that I'm suggesting, we will reassure folk that we're not about to destroy SENDIAS, or we're not about to leave families high and dry. That's the last thing we want to do. It's about keeping what is precious about SENDIAS, which is that personal relationship and that support for parents, but also make sure that we're delivering the minimum standards. Now, SENDIAS has stepped into a really difficult space. As Joe's just said, nobody was answering the phone at Sennar, parents were beside themselves. But actually we are in a different space now. And some of what SENDIAS is doing can now be done by Sennar, and actually should be done by Sennar. So I'm happy to continue to talk about the moving forward of the SENDIAS service. But the head of service has reflected and accepted the recommendations. So there won't be a rebuttal, because there isn't a rebuttal of the recommendations. Moving forward, I'm happy to report on the progress that we're making with the service, but absolutely want to reassure you that we're not going to be leaving any parents high and dry and without support. And what I want more than anything is that independent, safe space for parents to go to that is truly separate and objective to the local authority, because we need that, our system needs that. And this isn't about taking power away, it's about empowering, and at the same time as keeping parents empowered, obviously making sure we meet the minimum standards, because that's statutory guidance. In terms of the white working class boys and Afro-Caribbean boys, we brought a report to this committee just as soon as I started, I think in November, which set out the situation as in, we know that those youngsters have underperformed for a long time, wasn't as clear on what are we doing about it. So the developing local provision, I think we'll pick some of that up, won't it, Bob, in terms of focusing on those particular groups. And it could well be that once we've got the kind of task force around mental health out of the way, Chair, that this committee really has a focus on those underachieving groups and works with my education staff, because there is support going on for those youngsters. My question is, well, what difference is it making? And I think I'm happy to kind of open that up to more scrutiny, but we are aware of the data. The data is shared with schools and is discussed with schools by BEP, who are responsible for our improvement. We're looking at BEP's contract to refocus not only on special needs, but also on these groups of youngsters that for a long time have been underachieving. Bob, have you got anything to add with the inclusion strategy?
I think as the parts of the DLP are looking at the equality and diversity issue, and is everybody getting that consistent piece? So there are some trials and pilots that are happening at the moment. We were waiting the feedback from that. There's some stuff happening in this autumn term as well, which will have some traction. So the evolution of the inclusion strategy is being led by some of that work, and also looking at the good practice that is all happening in pockets. And we've also got the local enterprise partnership are involved, as well as some of the FE colleges. So you're looking at those pathways very clearly, and we're trying to make sure that there is equality of opportunity, but also a bit of a shift away, I guess, which is a national thing as well, around it's not always about the academic achievement, it is about the vocational opportunities, looking at some of the university technical colleges that are doing well, and there's the Aston UTC that has a particular pathway for young people. So it's trying to learn those lessons and then spread that out. But yeah, the equality diversity piece, I think, is a golden thread as well that runs through that inclusion piece.
Yeah, on that, go on.
Quick comment. Yeah, so again, it goes back to what you were saying about, academics not always the right pathway to some of them, especially the growth of poverty. For me, obviously, it's entrepreneurship. That's all part of the and really brilliant young people. And to go back to what we're doing in terms of inquiries, we are doing a youth violence inquiry at the moment. I think the council has limited how many inquiries we're doing, but a lot of this will be coming up on that. So please pay attention to what we find there. And as you say, it's a work in progress. I don't think something like this can be rushed. There's loads of people that I speak to, not just in my ward, but across Birmingham, who I'd love to just bring to this committee and say, just have a chat with these people so that we can get a huge
holistical overview of this and really put together a good piece of work and actually just, not be outshined by Dudley and say, Dudley, right? Birmingham's we've got our own unique, authentic way of dealing with this. Because in Birmingham in particular, I understand the statistics, might be more white working class over here. We do have, a very much more diverse community in Birmingham, but in terms of working class boys, we do know that they're much more likely to be expelled, 3 times more likely to be expelled than to go to university. There is clearly something wrong with our educational system, where certain kids who have been brought up in a poor background just simply don't gel well with our current economic system, our educational system in this society. And I'd love to talk massive politics about that, but maybe that time. Point is, as a city, I think we can all agree we can do a good piece of work on this and really set an example for the rest of the country moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Morell, and clearly we will be taking Sue up on her offer to delve more deeply. I think we will pick some of that up in the criminal exploitation inquiry that we're doing, and also Fiona's just reminded me of the employment and skills inquiry, and certainly that should pick some of that up as well. But clearly there's going to be a lot of work to do, and I hope that we can really do some focus work going forward, because it is really important. And just on the CENDIAS stuff that Councillor Morell has raised, I mean, clearly that we have got some shared concerns around the fact that this committee has not been party to any of the to the review. So we don't really know what was included, how it was carried out, what it looked at, and just some of that detail. I guess we'll have to wait for a report on the review. But really, what would the timelines on that be, Sue? And I hear that you've said that the head of CENDIAS has now agreed to receive all the recommendations. And I would like to have a further discussion at the October meeting and invite CENDIAS to that meeting. I didn't feel it was appropriate to come to this meeting because we haven't had sight of any of the information yet.
Just one point on that, and also time constraints, because you've got the actual secondary report out, so we wouldn't have time, right? But
I had no idea that she had accepted the recommendations, and I just wanted to make a point of clarification. I, in my shadow cabinet position, haven't actually been able to go and actually speak to CENDIAS. So a lot of my criticisms were based purely on what was put in front of me and what's happened over the last few months. But now that I know that, I can be like, finally, I can go and actually have a chat with CENDIAS and actually find out what's going on.
Thanks.
Cheers. I just wanted to make sure there's no conflict of interest there. So.
Sure. I don't know whether you just want to pick up on what I said very quickly, Sue, and then I'm going to move on to Councillor Hughes.
It might be worth yourself and me having a meeting with the Commissioner prior to because he's coming anyway, isn't he, Chair?
Yeah.
And then we can agree, because obviously there are some things I can't agree on his behalf. He's our Commissioner, but I'm quite happy to organise a 3-way meeting where you can put to him what you want for this committee, and then we can work our way forward.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Councillor Hughes?
Just briefly, you said at last meeting we'd get updates about the progress milestones with regard to the accelerated progress plan. We haven't got anything here that really gives us any indication of how things are going, apart from the line about the annual reviews. So I just wonder, how often will we get an update on those milestones and how we're progressing there? Also, I just wanted clarification. Bob referred earlier to the strategy. That is the SEND sufficiency strategy that was being talked about.
There are 3 separate strategies. There's an SEND strategy, and a component of that is the SEN sufficiency strategy, and vice versa. So there are 2 separate things: SEND strategy, the SEND sufficiency strategy, and then there's also a separate inclusion strategy.
So last meeting we were told the SEN sufficiency strategy was nearing completion. So I just wonder, when will we see that?
When that's been signed off, happy to bring it here. Obviously, the SEN sufficiency is about predicting future need, and we're playing catch up because we should have had one, but the fact is we've not. So that will be how we're going to deliver these places. We've put in a bid for 3 special schools with the DFE New Wave, but it's not all about special school places. This is also about resource provision and mainstream. So Jazda Diali from Lisa Fraser's team is just completing that review. It's at the end of this month, it will be ready. So we'll have a look at the forward plan and bring it when it's been signed off by my team.
Do you have a sort of off-the-cuff idea of how long it takes from an application to, kids through the school gate?
You can build a school.
It's not a couple of years, is it?
You can build a school. It's tight, but you can build a school in a year. It takes at least a year.
That was just curiosity. Earlier, you referred to some schools not wanting to accept children who might need more support. Now, in the past, it's not the case now, as far as I know. In the past, we have had schools in Birmingham that have been notorious for their exclusion of children with special needs. And one of the consequences of schools not wanting to have children with special needs is that those primary schools, and fortunately there are quite a few of them, that do a fantastic job of nurturing their children, become the go-to place for parents with children who need a bit more support. And the schools that don't want them get away with not having the added expense and support, having to provide the support. So I just wondered, you said you can direct schools, and ultimately it's you who decides where all the children in Birmingham go to school. What are we doing about those schools that don't want to take children who need a bit more support?
We do when we need to direct schools. We do talk to them about what will it take. The whole restorative practice is how we're going to help to change the culture of those schools who are worried about being inclusive, because it comes from a good place, worrying about children. It doesn't come from wanting to disadvantage children, but it actually does. And as you say, it can also really put a lot of pressure on the next door school, who gets a reputation for being more inclusive. And then you can soon get a critical mass of children, which without the appropriate resource, and this also features about money, and this is where the schools forum comes in as well, because some schools rightly say, well, we can't support those youngsters unless we have a full-time teaching system. But if you have, 8 full-time teaching assistants in one classroom, they're falling over each other. So how do we get better use then of that resource? And this is all about working with, bearing in mind we've had so much churn in our teams. As Sarah said, we've struggled to form relationships with head teachers because it's been one person 1 minute, one person the next. Building the consistent team will help us to build those relationships. So at the moment, there is low trust. And why would a head teacher say, okay, so I'm going to take this child, because what if that support's not there? And they don't have that trust. Hopefully they will see that they can have that trust, because if we say it's going to be there, it will be there. And Jo sorted a lot of that out with her team, and schools have responded really positively to that. But we're still in a place where we're building up that trust, and we'll get there when we get the permanent team. There's also a case of being able to challenge some schools who aren't playing ball, and we've got to do that sensitively, but we absolutely will do that. When we've got the evidence, we will have those conversations, because everybody needs to support our SEND children, and SEND is everybody's business, isn't it?
Very quickly,
just a consequence of that is, for instance, last year there was a primary school that had half a dozen children that needed quite a lot of extra support, but the school struggled to provide that. So those children were basically in for an hour a day, one after the other. They were never all there at the same time, and they're getting an incredibly limited education. The consequences of that, of course, for parents is they have to take the children to school, and they have to go back an hour later and take them away. So it impacts on the family as well to quite a degree. So I'm just making that observation, Chair.
We now monitor all the children on part-time timetables. We're still reliant on schools telling us that they're there, but there's a statutory obligation now to do that, and that is a bit of a...
I'm smiling there, Chair, because you've kind of opened up another line of questioning for me, but I am not going to risk incurring the wrath of the Chair.
Councillor McCarthy.
I just wanted to say that it's obviously not ideal that we have scrutiny in the morning and the improvement board in the afternoon, not just because we all have to rush off to the next meeting, but it confuses the flow of information. So if we can sort that out so that we're clear what reports data and narrative updates are happening in which order, what might need to go to Send Improvement Board first and then come here. There may be aspects that need your input before they go back to Send Improvement Board. But I think if we can at least get the timetable that's got some space to do that work, I think it would be helpful.
Thanks. Rabia?
Thank you so much, guys. It's really nice that you've presented everything. I was just going to pick up on the question that Councillor asked about. You can instruct a school to take a child and that day you can give them the support. But if they're struggling with it, what would they do with the child? Would they exclude the child or put them in a group, put them in a timetable?
That's a risk. We need to make sure that when we ask a school to take a young person, we're able to give them the resources that they need to support that young person, because that would be the worst thing for that youngster, wouldn't it? To start a new school and then be excluded. So we do need to make sure they're well supported, and there is always that risk. So we don't direct a school lightly, but sometimes we do, don't we, Joe, where that's appropriate?
Yeah, we do. And I think it's just worth noting now, when we consult with a school and the school comes back with reasons that they don't think that they can meet need, we then look at every single point and provide support around every single point of the part that they're struggling. So that might be we will provide funding, that might be we provide recommendations, that might be that we send our communication and autism team out to support. So in every concern that they raise, we look specifically to every single one of them and give a response or support or whatever it is needed to be able to help that school to meet the needs of that child.
Lovely, thank you. Just a couple of points, Sue, from me, and then I'm going to move on just because of the time. But in terms of the strategies and a sort of a timetable of when they might come, if you could let us have that information, perhaps by email, just giving us an idea of when we might expect them here.
Put them on the forward plan.
Yeah, that'd be really good. And then we're sort of clearer on what's coming. In terms of what you said about monitoring the part-time timetables, I mean, that's really interesting, but could we perhaps in the next report have an idea of what that looks like in terms of numbers of hours for those part-time timetables and how many children that affects? And also, just lastly, when we're talking about inclusion and exclusion, just some facts and figures about where we are at the moment in terms of children that haven't got a school place, and what is being put in to try and rectify that. I know that's not a simple thing to rectify, but just so we have an idea of how many children we're talking about. Just goes back to Des's update on milestones and other information. Des, you're dying to come in, aren't you?
You mentioned children without a school place. I think we should just clarify that children without a suitable school place. So we've got children who aren't in school because there isn't a suitable school place, and we've got children in mainstream schools because there isn't a suitable place in a special school. So I think
that's really key. That second one is really key because it's masked in the figures.
Yeah.
You see that I hadn't finished my sentence, Des, but I'll let you off. No, that is a really key point. So if you can have a think about that.
We'll have to think about that, Joe, won't we?
Yeah.
Lovely. So I just want to say thanks to Joe and Bob. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sue, as always. And I'm going to pass on to Karen.
Okay, you've had my written report, and I've also got some slides for you. I'll try and move through them fairly quickly to give you time to ask questions. And obviously there will be some overlap with Sue's report. Yeah, that's not the beginning. There we go. We won't spend a lot of time on that one. Cute graphics though there be. So the second slide starts to outline all those aspects that are part of my portfolio. So clearly the most important is the statutory guidance, the statutory role as lead member for Children's Services. Safeguarding, top of my list, and the thing that I thought would be the most difficult to cope with, but in fact, I've just been stunned by the quality of that work being done in the city, and led by the independent chair of the safeguarding panel. Overseeing the Children's Trust, that involves regular meetings, and they are brilliant at inviting me to events. Overseeing early years, corporate parenting, we all sign up on the day we accept our role as counsellors, corporate parenting as corporate parents, and of course the scent and inclusion aspects. Some numbers for you. In a city of over 1 million people, that's what we're looking at in terms of staffing, in terms of children, and in terms of children with additional needs. I suggest you bookmark this slide as it's a useful reference. There's a lot in there about what's going on in education. So the numbers don't quite add up because we've got 7 all through schools that show up in both primary and secondary, but that's a useful breakdown of what types of school we've got in the city, of their Ofsted ratings, and of the numbers of pupils that attend different types of schools. So save that one to come back to when you're looking at those issues. We've spent a lot of time this morning already on the improvement journey. As you know, we have the improvement board led by the Commissioner, which is looking at SEND services, and under Sue's leadership, the Birmingham Children's Partnership has been re-established to bring all agencies working with children and families together. And that's going to be crucial as we go into the winter and the cost of living crisis. We know how we can get to our partners with that work. So the strategic priorities to strengthen approaches to identify, recognise and respond to the vulnerability of specific groups of children and young people, and we've brought up various groups that we would be looking at in discussion so far this morning. Transform and improve SEND services in line with statutory requirements, and to deliver sustainable, well-performing services so that all our children in Birmingham are thriving. You will be aware of the efforts being made to transform and improve children and young people's travel. Thank you to those people who visited yesterday. We want our children and young people to be able to travel around the city, not just for education, but to take up other opportunities as well. And fourthly, to ensure that our services are sustainable in both senses of that word, that they are compliant with statutory requirements, and again, that they're designed to deliver best outcomes for all our children, young people, families, and communities. So we are making progress. My view is that what we need is steady, solid, unbreakable progress rather than a flashy dash for tick box results. And I can see that happening, the steady, solid bit, not the flashy dash. That we have made it clear that children and families are at the heart of what we're doing by renaming the directorate, that we are getting there on stability and permanence to the management team. Sue has led work on baselining all 26 service areas so that we know what we're dealing with. There'll be a further cabinet report in November to outline the resource and next phase of transformation. That's across the directorate, not just SEND. I attend the improvement board, which we've already referred to. From what I know of restorative practice, it's the right approach for our children and young people. I'm looking forward to learning more, having only come into this role at the end of May. Improved communication, again, steady, solid progress on this. We're seeing in different areas. I hope parents are seeing it. Certainly in the travel service, we're getting feedback that communication has improved. That needs to be sustained, built on, and the example used spread throughout the directorate. And the report does set out the progress across the board. So, SEND and inclusion, you've had the report on the accelerated progress plan. And I think every other point on that slide we've already covered, though do feel free to ask questions. I've really enjoyed working with the Children's Trust. Do you want me to finish the slides and then take questions?
I think so, yes, please.
Okay. As you know, they cover all the social work, children's social work aspects, plus safeguarding, youth offending, the Empower You work. Their quality assurance system is now firmly part of how they work. And they also lead on rights and participation. And there's some excellent work going on there. This was one of my best evenings and the one that I dreaded most of all before it, which was the youth takeover of the Corporate Parenting Board, where a number of our care leavers set out a number of asks that had been worked up with a larger group. And the response of the Children's Trust was so impressive. Just to take up the apprenticeship point, this was about apprenticeships in the private sector and the disparity in support as compared to care that's going into higher education. By the end, this was on a Monday, by the end of the week, Andy Couldrick had written a bid for a graduate trainee to pull the information together to underpin work on this. I've never, in 10 years in local authority, seen anyone work quite that quickly to address a problem. The young people were great. I've seen some of them more recently. I know that they take that approach with them. One of them is now working with their housing provider on how they work with care leavers. No, it was good. I would commend getting involved in activities around corporate parenting to all our members. But on our Monday morning meetings, the Chief Exec of the Trust and I talk about the financial challenges, the cost of highly specialist care placements. It's the same across the country. It's not a Birmingham problem. It needs to be resolved nationally. One of the issues I've picked up is the lack of secure places. For every secure place in the country that becomes available, there are 60 children who are waiting for that place, again, across the country. So we continue to talk about the budget and to look at specific pressures. In that case, I've written to the minister. I don't know if he'll still be in post once the junior ministers are allocated over the next couple of days, but I've written to say that this is a real problem and needs some focus. So slide 12 sets out who we commission activities from. Services, so Beck doing our school improvement, as you know, health services for our young people from the Community Healthcare Trust, the Children's Trust, as I've mentioned, and street games. And if you manage to fit in any visits to holidays activities, the holiday activities and food programme, you'll have seen how this work focused mainly on our free school meals receiving children to ensure that they got a meal and something interesting to do. I think some of them will have gone back to school this week with stories of what they did that will exceed any of their peers who had overseas holidays, because they were having so much fun. So that's basically it. In terms of my priorities, obviously they coincide with the strategic priorities. I think Sue referred earlier to the LGA help, and that focused us on we need to look for work that might fill some of our gaps, and your choices of inquiry subjects for the year, I think, really do that in terms of looking at areas that don't come up with other projects or the improvement board. We're talking about, it's gone out of my head what we were talking about last night about a specific problem. Speech and language therapies, that was it. Whether we can do some specific work around that in itself as an issue, but also as a template perhaps for looking at other therapies. We've got brilliant universities in the city training up speech and language therapists, but we're still seeing delays in getting children and young people the support they need. So where we can see that something isn't covered, we will look for ways of doing more work on that. Where there are offers out there that give depth to what we're already doing, but we will keep focused on the strategic priorities. We won't automatically accept every offer of help if it becomes the tail wagging the dog, if you like. Those areas that we know need support will be our focus. Though, for me, in my particular role, it's my job to also spot if other areas are not delivering quite what we'd like, sort of under the radar. I've enjoyed some of the visits I've been able to do. My major focus has been on SEND, and the thing that keeps me awake at night is the cost of living crisis. Hopefully we're going to get some good news from the new government, but the impact on our children of their homes being too cold to study, play, and relatively normal life in a time of crisis, plus the impact on children with additional needs. We know that asthma is affected by cold and damp, and we also know that where children have complex needs and they are equipment that's powered by electricity, their parents are already starting to worry about how they're going to get through the winter. So that's how I see things at the moment. Very willing to answer questions.
Thanks, Karen. We have got a number of questions, as you would expect. Apologies, I failed to introduce you as the Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Families, so forgive me for that. I'm so used to being on first name terms that sometimes I find it very difficult introducing other councillors by councillor, so it's not just you. Just on that last point, Karen, because of the leader's announcement yesterday around the cost of living, so I was going to ask you actually about how your thoughts on an early response affecting your area of responsibility. Clearly you will have started thinking about a response on how we can help families. Because there are so many issues to think about. It's not just the energy, it's cost of school uniforms, it's the meals during school holidays, it's what schools are being able to provide and what they can afford to provide, because we know schools are going to be in a really difficult situation as well. So it's just maybe just touch on a little bit more about what you're starting to think about and how any offer of support can be rolled out. You can hang on to that. You don't have to answer that now, because I'm sure it will come up in other questions as well.
Let me do it while.
Okay.
While it's
in your mind.
Top of the list. Obviously, we declared an emergency yesterday at Cabinet. I've been having some discussions with colleagues. Councillor Cotton will lead on the overwhelming, overriding and overwhelming burden of work across the city and across all groups. I'm having discussions about whether it would be helpful to bring a group of people together, particularly focused on the impact on children and young people. As you said, schools are getting their energy bill estimates. What we have to try and do is maintain the enhanced offer that the schools make to children. It undermines the rest of the work if those that are already offering after school clubs and breakfast clubs have to withdraw that because they need to shorten the length of time that they're heating the school. So discussions happening about whether it's useful to have a separate lens on provision for children. But the work is proceeding at pace because it needs to. We're in September. We need to reassure schools. We must reassure families. Right across the board, and we need to have a plan in place. But the start was the launch yesterday, and we will make sure that all councillors and stakeholders are taken.
Thanks very much. Just to let members know that there is a Send Improvement Board meeting, so we do need to try and wrap up in about 15 minutes. So if we can keep questions as short and to the point as possible, just to allow everybody to ask. So I'm going to go straight over to Councillor Clancy.
Mine's more from an education point of view. The report that we sent, not the slides today, but the report we sent this morning, which talks about all performance management, commission, etc. I just want to refer to the commission report, point part 9. We've got a list here of providers and organisations, Birmingham Education Partnership with Birmingham, and Getter's raised name today in discussions. I was just wondering actually what the contract, we know what the contract purpose is, that it's commissioned to do school improvement and development of schools. I just wondered if the committee knew what the life of the contract was, because my understanding back from 2015, it was on a 5-year cycle, but I'm not sure if that's changed, or if that particular commissioning contract is still the same, and where they are at the moment in that life of the contract. Obviously, we've talked a little bit today around the discussion of exclusions, children's system, where they're going and where they might not be and be left out. I just wondered what BEP's involvement was surrounding that, and I say that because if you look in the report that we had sent this morning, one of the other crises this city has, apart from what the cabinet members just mentioned, is the actual exclusion rates for them, particularly in the primary school. So if you look at the chart that we were provided with, which is in the report, and it is on page 37, it talks about the permanent exclusions for all schools. And obviously, we are the worst compared nationally, the primary schools and those exclusions. So we talk about crisis of energy and crisis of what families will be doing. If we are excluding high rates of children, particularly in primary, then should we be excluding children, sending back to families that can't pay bills? And we need to look at that. If you want to join the crisis, we need to look at how the city is working around that. Because if one thing we should do, and we've always said it, is keep the children in education. And therefore, if we've got the external influences of energy crisis, we need to keep the children in education. And that's the priority. So I just wondered what BEP was doing around that, the life of their contract, and how you will, as cabinet member, be looking at how we keep those exclusions down, so we keep the children on bed and we keep the children on bed. Thank you.
I think Sue, unless I'm conflating two meetings that I've been to in the last couple of days, I think Sue mentioned that the BEP contract was coming up for renewal, and we would look to include some of those aspects if we go review. Okay. I'm hoping you've got the dates in your head. It's going to be vital that we take all opportunities to reassure schools about what a more inclusive picture would look like. Exclusion shouldn't be a punishment. It should be about finding the best place for the child, and there are so many ways that should have been addressed before you get to exclusion. So that will be vital in that whole picture of reassurance for schools that we will all sign up to in different ways, whether it's through visits, obviously around working with individual cases, but also BEP offering support. I hope we can get to a point where that's happening, because yes, we've got to address those figures, and particularly also coming out of the pandemic, children have had less social opportunities, their behaviour may temporarily have fallen below what's normal for their age group. In primary, we need to be addressing that. So, what can you tell us about the BEP contract that I don't have to hand?
Well, it was just renewed before I started the role. I think from recollection, and I'll double check it, it was again a 5-year contract. However, we do know, for example, that there was no specific reference to supporting SEND. Now, BEP have worked with us and they've acted outside their contract, but that's what I'm saying, it's up for review, I think November time. So, you know, they work very well with us in partnership, and we will need to review that contract, because we also need to review the KPIs that have been agreed with BEP as well. So it's a work in progress. And again, it might be worth on the forward plan, inviting Tim, the CEO from BEP, and his lead practitioner, because they're doing some really good work with us, and it would be good to have a window on that. But as ever, you fix a contract for 5 years and then the world changes, doesn't it? So we had probably different needs last year than we've got this year. So we do review it annually, and you'll be involved in that, Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks for that.
Councillor Jan.
From my teaching background, before we used to support young people into, and this goes into progression skills. Now, a lot of young people struggle, especially the SEN, to sit down, pen to paper, 6-7 hours a day. what we used to do was before is take them out on skills because our young people desperately need to learn skills as well as learning how to read and write and so forth. And this will help them engage. So whether it's bricklaying, whether it's in motor mechanics, hair and beauty, but it's taking them off-site, teaching them how to basically work, be around a working environment, gain skills, experience, and also how to socially interact with others. And I was thinking, I was hoping maybe that is something that we can re-implement again, especially with the hard-to-reach children. Like, for example, Prince William's son doesn't just go to school, he goes out and builds a hut. So he's learning maths, he's learning different English skills and different abilities. And I think that's something that would be a fantastic idea to reintroduce that to the hard-to-reach SEN kids, because then not only are they sitting behind a table, but they're also going out learning how to communicate with others, how to have respect, but also skill settings, because that is something our young people are desperately needed, is to gain skills. But then that also goes under apprenticeships as well. Apprenticeships, A to C grades. A lot of the kids can't get A to C grades. So we need to do something more manageable and something more sustainable for them, to basically, instead of having A to C grades, because they might be brilliant with their hands, but not very good with pen to paper. So maybe if we looked at this grading, maybe it should go to A to D or A to E, maybe potentially, depending on the individual. So that's just my ideas of moving forward in supporting our hard-to-reach young people and looking for better ways to interact with them and make that difference with them. Thank you.
I guess some of that would come under the pathways work that you're doing, Bob.
Yeah, and there's a whole objective 4 is looking at those pathways and looking at those opportunities. So I'll report back to the project manager, Julie Tinley, who's looking after that stuff. But yeah, all of that is in the round around what is the right type of provision at the right time for the right child, so that they're getting and achieving and progressing the best they possibly can. I think it's also an interesting balance to be had, which is what is the responsibility of the centre, for want of a better phrase, as in the city, and what is the curriculum evolution, and what is the responsibility of the education sector and the establishments to put on and provide that support for their children. So there's a good balance to be had, and that partnership is coming together nicely. So, yeah.
In fact, some of the past projects during the summer did some of this work. I've seen photos of young people driving diggers on construction sites. They thought they were going to be doing manual labour with spades when they were told they were going to a construction site, but they actually got to see what working there would really be like, and they were very enthusiastic about that.
It was a fantastic programme, the Holiday Activity Scheme. I mean, it really was. And there's been a lot of really good feedback from it. So I'm going to move on. I'm sorry, Karen. It's just that we still got 4 series of questions. So Sarah Smith, then Councillor Morell, then Councillor Bano, and then Councillor Hughes.
Mine's a process one, really. So I just, from a committee point of view, can you explain how the scrutiny framework works regarding the commissioning partners? So are they accountable to officers who will update us, or are we expecting them to come? So take BEP and the educational outcomes. Are we expecting BEP to come and present, or are they going to answer to your team, Sue, and then they'll come and talk to us? Just from a process point of view, how does that work with those 5 commissioned partners?
That's an excellent question to which I don't know the answer, and I will defer to Sue.
Well, we're the lead commissioner. We are accountable through the commissioning. So I would expect my lead commissioner, Helen Price, who's my deputy as well, to come to report to this committee on any and all of those contracts. So we'll obviously have to work out the timescales because we review them at different times. And again, in the interest of openness and transparency, I'm really happy for the lead, particularly for BEP, because they work, hands-on with schools, to come as well. But technically, process-wise, we are responsible for reporting to you on the outcomes that we've achieved through that contracting.
Thanks. Fiona just wants to input from a scrutiny perspective.
From a statutory perspective, the Scrutiny Committee's statutory responsibilities is to scrutinise the work of the Council. But as with the work of the committees and inquiries, other organisations could be invited to attend. But it is on a voluntary basis there, whereas there's a requirement for the local authority to attend and provide information.
I think, thank you for that explanation. I think my concern is around an organisation like BEP, whereas you actually know exactly what BEP are responsible for. And I think it's only fair that they are held accountable for the things that they're paid to be accountable for, not for things that we might like them to be accountable for. So just that, if it's funneled through you, I think that keeps us focused on what that is.
I think it's, as Sue said, I think we would expect to be given the information so that we can scrutinise it on all of the commissioned bodies delivering services for us. But I also do think that we would very much like to have Tim from BEP to come to committee to give us more of a flavour of what BEP is actually doing, and just that we could offer some input into particular aspects of the work that they're undertaking. So I really would like to try and look at the work plan when we get to it and see where we can possibly slot them in. So thanks, Sarah. Councillor Morale?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be quite brief. I just want to ask about mental health, which you probably know I'm really passionate about. So I'm always actually banging on against my government, my area of course, asking for more funding and more stuff. And so, in terms of our children, it would be really refreshing if we could put a bit more mental health provision in, because government has done quite a bit, especially around schools. It's something that we really need to start with early years and
with the cost of living crisis that you've mentioned as well, I do think that it's something that we generally do need to start doubling down on. So I just want to explore that more with you, Karen, about what avenues we're going to. And I also just want to politely say as well, with the cost of living crisis, can we just be very cautious, especially on committee, that we don't weaponise it, so to speak, for political gain, because I think that, as long as I remember, a certain group in this council has said we've always been in the cost of living crisis. We're in a genuine one now, and I would like to see if we can come together cross-party, just like we did during COVID-19, to help alleviate the suffering that people, the hardship that people go through in the city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Morel. We certainly will not be weaponising anything on this committee in that regard. So you can take my word for that. Karen?
That was the way in which it was agreed yesterday at Cabinet. Mental health, children and young people's mental health is something that I'm very interested in exploring further, how we deliver support with partners. I will, in future visits to the committee, be able to say more. I think particularly at primary school, but also at transitions, representing the ward that I do, you'd expect me to be concerned about transferring to higher education when young people have moved from hopefully a stable service at home to having to start again with a service. Those transitions need to be improved as well as at school transition stages. But it certainly is something that will be on my list.
And presumably, Councillor Morale, the inquiry into mental health will provide some really good recommendations as well for the partnership work, including the work that the council can do. So thank you for that. So I've got Councillor Banner and Councillor Hughes that just say, try and be really sort of concise with the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is around cost of living. My concern is having a look at what that was spent over years ago. It's around eligibility. The holiday schemes and the holiday programs that were running throughout summer was absolutely fantastic. I visited quite a few in my area and they were absolutely fantastic. But my main concern is the eligibility. We've come out of COVID. All children, all families will be feeling the cost of living. It was only the children that are entitled to free school meals. But the cost of living is affecting every single family. So in essence, there was children, which residents have come to me, single parent families on a threshold of earning under 18,000, were not eligible for the holiday activities, for the food programme or the healthy vouchers. But we need to be reflective on, if we want to be an inclusive society, we can't exclude children from these holiday schemes. Coming out of COVID, children spent a lot of time in their households. These programs were offering social, emotional, and communication for all children. They were absolutely fantastic. The cost of childcare has risen. Parents are going to work. Some parents are working part-time, but these kids were not eligible. They were having to fork out anything between £20 and £35 to get their children into the same scheme that was offered to children whose parents don't go to work. The same families were then offered, which is fantastic what we're doing, free uniform. You know, they've got the free meals, they've got the free childcare, they've got the free holiday schemes. But these families are not entitled to any of this. If we really want to help young families, we want to help children, we need sort of a universal approach of protecting all the children under the age of 16.
The funding was particularly aimed at children in receipt of free school meals. There was a margin where schools could recommend other children who were felt to be in need. Take on board completely that the need is wider, but that was all that could be done with this particular funding stream. Going forward, both Councillor Cotton and I will be very mindful of the wider need. That is the whole point, really, of having to look at it in the way that we are looking at it, because so many people will be affected. And yes, it would have been great to spread the HAF programme wider, but that's the way that the funding was structured.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, Councillor Barnett. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few quick questions. I'll just fly through them. You referred to the number of staff, nearly 1,800 staff, 26 service areas. Is there like a departmental structure chart that would show us them service areas? Because I would like to see them to know what they are, basically.
We can do that.
Also, you said the baselining of services has been done. Is that information available for the committee so that we can see where their services are? The funding bits for the 3 free schools, when do we know the outcome of those bids? And also exclusions, obviously the rate of exclusions from primary schools is a concern to an awful lot of people. The idea that children of that age get excluded from school is frankly horrendous. I'm just wondering how many of them subsequently turn out to be excluded because they have unmet special educational needs, if there's any data on that. Are children with HCPs being excluded from primary schools? And finally, your comments in your report about the Children's Trust, which refers to projected but unfunded growth in numbers of children in care. I just wonder what the basis is for that and what these projections are. It'd just be nice to have an idea what they're based on. The significant rise in the complexity of need of those in care as well. I'm wondering if there's any information on that. Why are these children having more complex needs? It just sounds... It sounds worthy of investigation to me. That's it.
Okay. Are you due to landing, Ulrich?
Yes, we are due to have him, but not till November. So later on, but certainly, November meeting. So we'd certainly be expecting answers to a lot of those questions, Des, but we will. What we can do is we can, definitely. But no, we should try and get answers to some of those questions sooner than November, because clearly in terms of the excluded children, all of the things that you talked about, really, if we can get some of that data in advance, that would be really good.
There's absolutely data on some of the things you described. So if you could just literally send me the list of those questions. In answer to the question about free schools, so the deadline for the application, its initial application, is October this year, but it does take, it's a long process. I think there's a bit of a health warning as well. There are 2 other schemes happening At the moment, there are schools within those schemes that also will be applying for free schools. And the government are only saying they're going to issue, or the DFE, sorry, are only saying they're going to allow 60 free schools to be applied for. There's already 69 schools in the other programmes. And they're also saying very clearly, if the local area should really only apply for one, and in exceptional circumstances apply for two. So going for three is quite a big ask. So we're in this conversation with the DFE about how that's going to play out. But the timetable for the free schools, it starts in October. I don't know the rest of that, but I can find that out as well. So.
Yeah, and that is the only way we can open. We can have open completely new schools. You'll see as the papers have gone through the cabinet that we are, where we can, extending existing provision to improve and extend.
I'm dreadfully sorry, Chair.
I don't know. I'm sorry. There's one other caveat to that, which is there is the free schools. There's the application to the DFE, but there's also called the presumptive route, and I don't know all the technical details of that. But that's about the local area deciding they need a school, and we can use our own resources to make that happen. So that could also be a route that we take. But it's that needs to be. I don't know the technical stuff behind that, so but I can find that out.
Just on the extended provision, I've spoke to special school head teachers a couple of months ago before the school holidays who were taking significant numbers of pupils above their pupil allocation number. So we've got a lot of schools with more children than their pupil allocation number. You're extending school places. Are them school places on top of the extended number of students they've got in school, or are they just being absorbed by that? What I mean is, you say we're extending school places, but have we actually got any more kids in school?
I think on the papers I've taken through cabinet, in each case, it's more than the actual number in the school. I could be wrong, but the intent, I mean, it may be that the schools have come back and said, to do this long term, we need X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So we'll add that onto the list of questions.
Schools are taking more than their pupil allocation. I don't want to get lost in the...
Very quickly, and Andy can do this much better than I can. Complexity of need. I mentioned the need for secure places and however subscribed those places are. The same applies to very complex needs. I'm afraid to say that the companies who provide that care can almost name their price. The pressure is such, and we've seen gradual increases in that provision. If a child or a young person needs a solo placement and round-the-clock care, then that entails a very heavy price tag to keep that child and community safe.
One thing just very quickly on Appendix 2, because I forgot to mention this earlier, Karen, the point 13 was the percentage of agency social workers, including team managers, and it says that we haven't met any of those targets within the last 12 months, and it's at 0%. So clearly Andy Coldrick will be able to give us more information on that, but I think that should be one of the questions that we ask in the meantime, direct to Andy about giving us some more information about that, unless, because we haven't got time to do it now.
It's the same across our services to, as Sue alluded to, it's the same across the country. I'm not being flippant, but hopefully the view that people around the country have had of Birmingham over the last month will help us to recruit permanent staff by making Birmingham look like somewhere that you'd like to move to and work in.
And one last question for you, and then you can go if you need to, is would you be able to come to our April committee meeting when in 2023, when the Children's Trust will be here again to provide us with a further update on priorities.
Absolutely. And if I'm not, when I'm not here in person, in between then and now, I'll be watching.
Okay.
Online,
so
that I'm up to date with your.
We've got the Children's Trust in November, but that again, we haven't got you down to come in April, so we were just going to give you advance warning on that. Thank you very much, and thank you for all of those questions. There's lots to follow up from those discussions. And Amanda has been typing furiously to make sure that she's captured all of that. Item 7 is the work programme. So I think there's not much to agree there other than we're going to invite Tim from BEP. So we need to have a look at it and fit him in somewhere. Councillor Morrell?
So am I right, the Commissioner's coming to the next meeting?
That's correct.
Okay. Can I suggest, based on what was said today in this meeting by the DCS about SENDIAS agreeing to the recommendations, I would still like the SENDIAS to come to the committee to talk about the review of what they're actually doing and see what was agreed and what wasn't agreed, because we obviously need to explore that.
I would like that very much as well, Councillor Morrell. I have committed to Sue that I will have a chat with her about having a three-way with John Coughlin, but I'd very much like SENDIAS to be represented at the next meeting.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Okay, so everybody's happy with the work plan that we've got at the moment. We have got some flexibility later next year to add some of the things in, and we can have probably a better discussion about that when we have more time.
Yep.
Yeah,
Just wanted to update on the inquiries.
Oh, yeah,
Councillor Hughes will be
sorry.
chairing the child exploitation inquiry. It's the first task and finish group meeting of that yet, but we're looking for the week being the 26th of September. So we'll be able to report back at the next meeting on progress on that work, including the scope.
You've circulated some dates, haven't you, for those to try and get a...
Yeah, hopefully if we can just have a quick chat after this, it won't take a minute just to...
I need to get to the improvement ordinance.
Oh, of course, yeah, I forgot you're
Yeah.
Send me an email, we'll sort something out.
Date and time of next meeting is 18th of October, 10 o'clock again. Any call-in requests or petitions? No, thank you very much. We know there isn't any other urgent business, and then just authority for the chair in an urgent situation between meetings. The chair jointly with the relevant chief officer has authority to act on behalf of the committee. Agreed. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for your input today, and welcome to the new faces that we haven't been able to do properly, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if we can just wait until the live stream finishes.
Bye.